your hosts will take you through some of the most fascinating crime stories in under 20 minutes. If you're looking for a quick and engaging deep dive into the world of true crime, you've come to the right place.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're going deep back into the past to revisit a case that's, well, it's one that never seems to lose its grip on the public imagination. The Menendez brothers. And wow, you guys really delivered on this one. We've got stacks of articles, court documents, even some, let's just say, spirited debates from Reddit.
Yeah, it's one of those stories that just seems to get more compelling with time. Maybe it's the whole, wealth and privilege mixed with this brutal violence. Or maybe it's that it forces us to ask these, well, kind of uncomfortable questions about family, about justice, even about what truth really is.
You nailed it.
Oh.
So before we really dig in, let's rewind back to the beginning, August 20th, 1989. Picture this, a Beverly Hills mansion, the kind of place that whispers success. And inside, Jose and Kitty Menendez are found, well, they were shot to death in their own home. And the prime suspects, their sons, Lyle and Erik.
And right from the start, you have all these details that are almost too, too Hollywood to be real. We're talking about Jose Menendez, a high-powered entertainment executive, his wife Kitty, a former beauty queen. They seemingly had the picture-perfect life, the mansion, the cars, the whole 9 yards.
Except, as we'll see, that image of perfection, well, it was hiding a much darker reality. Even before the murders, there were these cracks in the facade, these hints of trouble brewing beneath the surface.
Absolutely. Some of what we've uncovered paints Jose as a very, let's say, a demanding and controlling father, the kind who pushes his sons relentlessly towards success no matter the cost. Like, there's this quote from their former swim coach in the LA Times. He said, "It seemed like Jose was so competitive, but he was so completely overbearing, it had the opposite effect."
And then you layer on top of that the even darker allegations, the claims of abuse that would become the cornerstone of the brothers' defense.
And that's where things take this really sharp turn because, see, for a while it seemed like a pretty straightforward, if tragic, murder case. But then, a few months after everything happened, the brothers start going on these crazy spending sprees. We're talking Rolex watches, luxury cars, designer clothes, the works. It raised a lot of eyebrows, especially with the investigators.
It was hard to reconcile that behavior with the image of grieving sons. And as it turns out, those suspicions were, well, they were definitely warranted. Erik, eaten up by guilt, confessed to the murders. He told his psychologist, a Dr. Jerome Oziel, everything.
And here's the thing. Ozil, he was secretly recording those sessions, those therapy sessions, and those recordings, well, they became a bombshell in the case. Suddenly you have this confession, and it's caught on tape. It blew the whole case wide open.
And it wasn't just a confession to the murders. In those recordings, the brothers, they claimed they acted in self-defense. They described years of horrific abuse, physical, emotional, even sexual abuse at the hands of their father. They painted this picture of a family living in fear, a family controlled by a tyrant.
It was an explosive claim, and it divided the entire nation. Suddenly, you had people choosing sides. Some believed the brothers, saw them as victims, driven to this desperate act after years of suffering. Others, they aren't buying it. They saw Lyle and Erik as cold-blooded killers, manipulating the system, hiding behind this story of abuse to escape justice.
It's wild, right? You have this picture-perfect family, at least on the surface, and then this whole other alleged reality lurking underneath. It's no wonder the case became such a sensation.
And that clash, those two completely opposing narratives, it's at the heart of the trials. The first one, back in 1993, it was a media circus. Cameras everywhere, reporters clamoring for every detail. The brothers, they took the stand themselves.
They didn't hold back, did they? From what I read, their testimonies were, well, intense.
Intense is one word for it. They gave these very emotional, very graphic accounts of the abuse they claimed to have suffered. And it wasn't just their word against their parents, even though, of course, Jose and Kitty were no longer around to give their side of the story.
Some other family members backed up their claims, right? I vaguely remember reading something about that.
Exactly. Lyle and Erik's cousins, Andy and Diane, they both testified, said they were aware of the abuse the brothers were allegedly subjected to. But even with that, the prosecution, they stuck to their guns. They argued the brothers had it all, motive and opportunity. Said they were motivated by greed, that they concocted this whole abuse narrative to inherit their parents' money and basically get away with murder.
So you have the jury stuck in the middle of this tug of war, trying to figure out whose version of the truth, if anyone's, they believed.
And it proved to be just too much. The jury couldn't agree on a verdict. Hung jury, mistrial declared. It was a huge blow to the prosecution. But they weren't giving up. They decided to retry the case.
Which brings us to the second trial in 1995. And if the first one was a media frenzy, well, this one was like pouring gasoline on the fire.
Totally. And this time, the prosecution, they had a few new tricks up their sleeve. They presented new evidence, including testimony from Lyle's ex-fiancée.
Oh, wow, yeah, I remember this. Didn't she claim Lyle tried to, like, silence her?
That's right. She testified that Lyle had tried to bribe her, to convince her to lie about his father, to make Jose seem even worse than he already appeared. It was a risky move by the prosecution, introducing this whole other layer of drama, but
But it seems like it worked, at least in terms of swaying the jury.
it did. The second jury, they came back with a guilty verdict. First-degree murder for both Lyle and Erik. And with that, they were sentenced to life in prison, no chance of parole. It seemed like after years of legal battles, the case had finally reached its conclusion.
Except, well, here we are, decades later, still talking about it. And it's not just us. Thanks to shows like that Netflix series, Monsters, the Lyle and Erik Menendez story, this case is back in the public eye, generating just as much debate and discussion as ever.
Yeah, that Netflix show, it's really thrown fuel on the fire. Millions of people have watched it, and it sparked all these online conversations, debates, you name it. And the show itself, well, it's not without its critics.
It seems like people either love it or hate it, right? No in between.
Pretty much. Some argue that it's too sympathetic to the brothers, that it minimizes how awful their crimes were. Others have a problem with how graphic it is, especially the scenes depicting the alleged abuse. They say it's exploitative, that it could be triggering for viewers who've experienced similar trauma.
And we can't forget about the impact it's had on the Menendez family themselves. Some family members have been really vocal, saying the show is inaccurate, hurtful, that it sensationalizes a real tragedy, and disrespects the memory of Jose and Kitty.
Which I think highlights something really important. At the end of the day, this isn't just some true crime drama. These are real lives, real people whose lives were shattered by this tragedy.
It's a good point, a necessary reminder. But it's not just the Netflix show breathing new life into this case. Social media, especially TikTok, well, it's become this whole other battleground for debating the Menendez brothers.
Oh, absolutely. TikTok, with those short videos that grab your attention and don't let go, it's introduced the case to a whole new generation. And what's interesting is that we're seeing this generational divide in how people interpret the case, the evidence, even the brothers themselves. It's like we're having the same conversations we were having 30 years ago, but through this entirely new lens.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it, with everything we know now, with how our understanding of things like abuse and trauma has evolved, is it possible that the Menendez brothers might have received a different verdict if they were tried today?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? We're much more aware now of the complexities of abuse, the long-term effects it can have on someone, especially when it happens in childhood. There's a greater understanding that people who've experienced prolonged abuse, well, they might react in extreme ways, even resorting to violence as a way to survive.
So where does this leave Lyle and Erik now, after 35 years? Are they still those, I don't know, those scared kids we saw in the courtroom, forever defined by that one horrific night? Or has time, has it changed them?
Well, they're both still incarcerated, right? They're living out their lives within the prison system, a far cry from the world of Beverly Hills mansions and sports cars.
And for a long time, they were separated, weren't they?
Yeah.
Held in different prisons. I remember reading something about that.
Yeah, for over 20 years, actually. But that changed back in 2018. They were reunited at the R.J. Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego.
Really? Wow, that's interesting. I guess it makes sense, though, right? I mean, at a certain point, what's the point of keeping them apart?
Right. And by all accounts, they've both been, I guess you could say, model prisoners. They've taken advantage of rehabilitation programs, gotten degrees, and they've become pretty involved in prison reform efforts.
Lyle especially, right? I feel like I've heard his name a lot in connection with some of those initiatives.
Definitely. He's become a vocal advocate for things like restorative justice, second chances, that sort of thing. He co-founded a support group for men who experienced abuse as kids, and he's talked pretty openly about his own experiences.
It's kind of remarkable when you think about it. Their story, it's gone from this sensationalized murder trial to, well, now they're advocating for change, for understanding from within the system that imprisoned them.
And it's hard not to see that, at least in part, as a result of the renewed interest sparked by the Netflix show by social media. It's brought their story back into the spotlight, but this time the conversation is different. It's less about guilt or innocence and more about these bigger questions of justice, of what it means to serve your time, to be rehabilitated.
And their family. I mean, they're fighting for their release, too. They've been really public about it, saying Lyle and Erik have paid their debt, that they're not a danger to society anymore, and that keeping them locked up serves no purpose.
Right. They point to the work they've done, the changes they've made, but whether that will be enough to sway those in power, well, that remains to be seen.
It's hard to imagine any scenario where they just, walk free.
Mhm.
But maybe, I don't know, maybe some form of clemency or reduced sentences, something like that.
It's possible, but it would be a long shot. It would probably take something like executive intervention, like a pardon from the governor or even the president. And those are decisions that are often as much about politics and public opinion as they are about, well, justice, for lack of a better word.
And it's not like everyone's on board with the idea of leniency, even with everything we've learned. There are still a lot of people who believe Lyle and Erik got what they deserved, that no amount of good behavior can erase the fact that they murdered their parents in cold blood.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this case, even after all these years, so endlessly fascinating. There are no easy answers, no clear-cut good guys and bad guys, just a tangled web of tragedy, trauma, and the kind of moral dilemmas that make you question everything you thought you knew.
You said it. I mean, we've gone through piles of research, court documents, expert opinions, and I still can't say for sure what I believe.
And that's okay. That's kind of the point of a deep dive like this, isn't it? It's not about reaching some definitive conclusion, some neat and tidy resolution. It's about wrestling with these complicated questions, confronting uncomfortable truths, and maybe, just maybe, coming out the other side with a little more understanding, a little more empathy, even for those whose actions we might never condone.
Well said. And for our listeners, if you found this deep dive as thought-provoking as we did, well, first of all, let us know. Join the conversation online, share your thoughts, because these are discussions worth having. But beyond that, if you really want to go deeper, check out the source material we provided. There's so much more to explore, so many layers to this story, and we've only just scratched the surface.
That's right. And until next time, keep asking those tough questions, keep those critical thinking caps on, and we'll be back soon with another deep dive into a case that's sure to challenge your assumptions and leave you wanting more.
Thanks for listening to Criminal Conversations. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment to rate and review. It makes a huge difference and really helps us out. All of the sources used for today's episode can be found in the show notes. Join us every Monday and Thursday for a new story and another criminal conversation.